I need to redo this cluster gear because two reasons. The first is that it went in so easily that I didn't have a chance to show it on video. And the second is that I'm not quite happy with the clearance. I think it's maybe a little bit too tight, so I need another 1/1000th. So here I'm just putting in my dummy shaft. My dummy shaft is 6 11/16 of an inch long. That's about 171 millimeters. So I'm putting the dummy shaft in there, and hopefully it will hang on to all of those needle bearings. Ow! Oh, I just got my finger caught, and my finger is now a dummy shaft. Okay, I'm trying not to move the case around on the table. That's the big problem here. Because if I move the case, then it goes out of shot on the video. Oh, I don't need the reverse idler in there. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to take one of the thrust washers, thrust washers out of here at the same time as I'm taking out the... Okay, so there I've got one end out, and now the whole cluster comes out at the same time. Whoa, don't tip it, or I'm going to have bearings all over the ground. So you can probably see I've got my dummy shaft in there. You can see I'm pushing it out. Slides easily. It's just a plumbing pipe. And I gave you the length already. Why did I take this out? I need to measure and find a thinner thrust washer. And I need to show you how it goes in. So I've got my kroners. This was 50 plus 13 and a half. Let's just go with this one. 50 plus 13. Well, that's half a thou. Half a thou is half a thou. Yeah, as they say, half a thou counts sometimes, and this might be the time that it counts. Yep, this is the one that's going back in because it's half a thou thinner. It was so close. There was about 1/1000th clearance there before, so add another half a thou, it'll be okay. I need to show you how this goes in. First, I'm going to put the thrust washer in on the... I need to point out. So I made a mistake. Earlier in the video I showed you that I put the bearing onto the input shaft, and I hammered the bearing on, and I used a pipe to put that on. The only problem is I couldn't put this input shaft into the case after the cluster gear was already in there, because this oil slinger gets in the way when you put it in. I couldn't put it in from the inside. I couldn't put it in from the outside because the synchro gear was in the way. So that was if the cluster gear was in first. So I tried putting the input shaft in first, but I couldn't get the cluster gear in. So here I am. I've got the bearing off. The bearing is actually in the case right now, and I'm setting the input shaft aside because I'll put that in later. Anyway, here is the input side thrust washer is in place. I have in my hand the thinnest other thrust washer that I just measured, and I need to put some grease on that. So I'll just put a little or a lot of grease on that and some on the other side so that it sticks in place once it gets into location. So I've got the cluster gear here. Whoa, baby! No! Okay, it's still together. Thank you, grease. Okay, I'm just checking for my spacer on this side and the spacer on the other side, and they're still there. Okay, so this goes in my hand, and I am ready to put the thrust washer in at the same time as I shove in the cluster. So down it goes. It is in position. I'm just checking to see if this other thrust washer has moved. It's either in place or it moved. No, it's in place. No kidding. Okay, so it's in place. Now I'm sliding. Oh, I doubt you can see anything. Sorry. So I'm sliding the other thrust washer in from the other side. Okay, wow, that's easy. Okay, and I take a look. Now I've got my correct, this is the counter shaft that I'm putting in. Sorry, I don't want to move the case around because I have no idea if it'll be out of frame. So I've got my finger in the hole right now, lining everything up. Try not to move anything. Oh, piece of dirt. Way to go. There we go. Okay, so you can see the dummy shaft is coming out the other side. There's the measurements, 6 and 11/16. And it is in position to stay for a while, and I'm just going to stop the camera right there. Before I drive this counter shaft all the way in, I need to make sure that this hole lines up so that this pin can go down in and go through that hole. This is an older style transmission case, so the earlier style used the one large rod or pin that goes through those holes, whereas the newer one used a roll pin that fits in there and it fits into slots on the front. The pins are the same, the counter shafts are the same. It's just that the newer style, they put a roll pin in the hole instead. So I need to rotate that so it aligns. I'm just going to see if, okay, rather easy because I haven't driven it in yet. So it looks like it's pretty straight up and down. And now okay, it's almost flush. The next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my reverse idler gear. I want to test this one right now because this is actually the reverse idler gear that came out of this case to begin with, and the other gears are from the other case. But it seems like the reverse idler is exactly the same teeth, but interestingly enough, the reverse idler on this one is wider teeth, so it has a lot more area. So I'm kind of curious about that, whether it'll fit and if it's useful to have wider or more teeth. That's all I really need it in for right now, just to see. Oh, look at that. Spins nicely. How much? A little bit of a knock. Again, I'm going to have to make sure this all lines up because I've got this pin. It's got to go down this hole, through there, through the case again, and then into the first countershaft pin, which I guess that's kind of redundant, the first countershaft, which I already installed, and I've already checked to be sure that that pin lines up perfectly. Okay, I think I'm ready to tap this in a little bit more. Okay, it's hit the other side, on the other side there. Now it's just a matter of, well, definitely I can see that's not lining up, so that really doesn't look too bad. Okay, let's, Okay. Take another look. I don't know, maybe it's a piece of dirt down there. Let's just try this. It's going to work. Take a look at that hole in the top. That hole is not from the factory, but that's where I took a couple of very small drill bits and went to about that size so that I could thread a screw into the end of it and then pull it out by grabbing onto the screw. Otherwise I didn't know how to get it out. But now that I see I could put a punch in from the other end, never thought of that. Why not? Don't know. There. Bottomed out. It's installed. Does it still rotate? Oh, look at that. Spins nicely. Previously, I had put back the old slinger. It looks really beat up because I beat it to death when I was removing it, but it still works. By the way, the slinger goes so that there's a little ridge, a chamfer. No, whatever. There's a little bend on there. You want that to bend toward the gear, because if you put it in the other way, it hits the bearing, and then you get this little inside there where it's rubbing on the bearing. And in fact, there was a major portion right about there that was rubbing before. But I found even if it rubs a little bit when you put it in, not hard to fix because I just took a screwdriver and I could bend that very easily. I do have a new one, as well as a whole package of small parts, which I bought. But the only thing I wanted out of that package really were the new thrust washers, which I used. Oh, and I needed one snap ring for the input bearing, but it comes with a bearing, so go figure. Anyway, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to hold this slinger. This is an oil slinger that basically allows the bearing and the gears to get enough oil, but it doesn't allow too much oil to go into the output shaft. Okay, so I'm putting the slinger in there, and it's the cause of the problem if you're trying to get the gear out, if it doesn't come off the shaft. So it hits the back gear, or the front gear, the big one. Anyway, I've lined this up, and I'm putting this through, and we'll know in a few minutes. Okay, so there it's lined up. That's what the gear that it's going to engage with. Let's see if I can rotate this. Once I drive that all together, and the gear and the shaft is fully engaged on the bearing, that's what it's going to look like. And you know what? I think I am really impressed. Everything is rotating, and it's going to work. Of course, later I have to put the output shaft with all the synchros and everything on there, and we'll see what happens at that point. I guess to be fair, I need to show you what I'm doing here to try and drive this shaft onto the bearing. So I just got myself a 13/16 impact socket. It fits right in there, sits on the surface. I do have a problem because on the input side, as I'm tapping, the bearing is coming out of the housing. So I have to figure out what I'm going to do there. Okay, it's time to be honest and show you what I had to do to actually get this assembly all in. So I went back to my axle stand, and that was just a pipe that was the right size to hit the inner piece on the bearing. Could have been a little bit smaller, but it worked. So that went on. Then Let me just take that off for a second. Then this end was on the ground, on the concrete floor. So then I had and that piece sat on the floor. So I put that on the concrete floor. Then I sat down on a low stool. I put the transmission case between my knees, and so the pressure of the weight of the transmission case was on the top here, on the inner part of the bearing. Then I took my little tool that I showed you before, and that's what I was hitting on in order to drive the input shaft onto the bearing all the way. And now I'm at the point where I need to put the snap ring. Turn this around. So I need to put the snap ring on, and I've just got the snap ring opened up there. And let's see if I can do this without losing an eyeball. Okay, so the snap ring's pretty close. And oh, it's in. So that's everything has to be in position, because I've got the large snap ring here, so that means that the bearing cannot go too far into the case. I've got the snap ring which fastens the bearing and the input shaft together, so they must be correct. I got a little slop there, which is going to be taken up by the gear oil, but it certainly is no worse or better than it was when I took it out of the other case. Now, the only other thing I want to show you right now, you're not going to be able to hear because there's too much noise, but that oil slinger that I was talking about, if it's bent, it's going to hit on the bearing as it rotates, because the outer part of the bearing doesn't rotate, it's sealed into the case, and it'll do a little chirping sound. I don't know. You probably can't hear it, but I'm sure it's there. I heard it before. So I'm just taking the screwdriver and I'm just bending that slinger out. That's interesting. The slinger is rotating, spinning. So that tells me that it's not actually squished super tight between the bearing and the input housing casting. So it's a little loose. Okay. Whoa, am I happy. I can buy the 3-speed transmission gaskets for the side mount, or the side loader, that has the oval shape on the side mount case, but that doesn't help, because the only gasket that's the same is the one that goes on this end onto the housing, that little round one. That's the only one that's the same. So everything else is different, so there's no use buying that kit. I went to an auto supply store and they checked and checked and checked and did all kinds of phone calls, and after a couple of weeks we found out that it was going to be impossible to buy gaskets. This transmission only existed for 2 or 3 years, so that was it. So it's going to be make your own gaskets with gasket paper. And besides, of this paper was hardly even the price that I probably would have paid for half of one gasket set. Before I put the output seal in, I added a little bit of grease to the bushing. Who knows how long it'll be before lubrication gets back there. By the way, that bearing doesn't ride on the output shaft. The bearing rides on the yoke. So it's the yoke that actually does the touching of that bushing. Anyway, next comes the seal. So I've got my seal here, And just so that I don't beat the living daylights out of the seal and have it growing crooked, I've got myself some kind of a pipe cap here that I'm going to tap on in order to put that in. So look at that, already it's crooked. So I've got to set the camera down and do this properly. You missed all the excitement? Actually none at all. I put that plumbing cap on there, hit it with the hammer a few times, bang, perfect. Everything's in there. I think now, before I forget, I'm just going to add a little bit of grease to this to give it a little bit of lubrication, because I might forget later. Then I packed that input shaft with some grease and put in the 15 roller bearings that are supposed to go in there. This is going to be a very tight squeeze, trying to get all of these pieces to line up correctly all at one time. I put in the synchronizer ring. Under the synchronizer ring is a little bit of grease, just to be sure that it sticks in place so that it doesn't fall out when I'm doing something really weird and have to hold everything else in place. I'm going to video just a little bit here just in case this works. I really don't know. So I'm going to lie this down flat and hope that's the way that it's supposed to go in. And now I have the output shaft, and I know this is very tight, and I am very sorry, but I'm going to have to put the camera down right now, and I'll let you know in a couple of seconds if this actually works. You can see that I've got the slider up far. I might just push the slider up a little bit further before I start doing this. I'm kind of excited. That actually went in very easily. I was being very careful not to knock the roller bearings to make them fall down, but it all slid in, so I'm happy about the roller bearings. I almost was ready to stop and remove the reverse idler because of this gear just hitting on it, but suddenly it popped in, and so I didn't have to. So it looks like I might have it incorrect. So now I still have the rear bearing here in the case. That bearing needs to be what? I don't know. Where does that ring? Oh, great. You know what? That snap ring has to fit into the, it fits here, into the output housing. So I'm not sure that that's right. That might all have to be assembled in one piece. So earlier I had pushed the input bearing out a little bit towards the front so that I had more clearance on the inside of the case in order to angle in the output shaft. Now at the back, the rear bearing is kind of inside the case, but I'm thinking that, see, I don't want to accidentally pull the output shaft out of the roller bearings and have it all fall apart inside there. So I'm thinking that if I tap this back into the case, maybe even if I take the snap ring off and tap it further back into the case than it needs to be, I know I can go back in by maybe 3/16 of an inch until that slinger, where's the slinger? Until the slinger just starts to tap onto the gear here. I know I can go that far. So that might mean that I've got enough of this bearing sticking out in order to install the snap ring into that groove, maybe. maybe. I don't know how I'm going to get my tool in there, but I might be able to do it with a pair of pliers, and it might go pop, and then it might be stuck. Oh, I might be able to actually get a long screwdriver and push the snap ring in from the inside the case. Don't know. So that's what I'm going to try and do. I don't have 3 arms, so once again, I cannot video. Here's the new gasket. Waiting for the output tail shaft. It's together. So it was, I would say, a bit less of a problem than I thought it might be. Anyway, what I want to show you right now is that down inside here, I'm not sure, can I see? Yeah, you can see the groove. So I've got to put the snap ring into that groove, and that will keep the bearing in the case of the output shaft housing. Yeah, output shaft housing. And then I also have to put the snap ring on the front bearing. And then of course the housing that goes on there. But this is all looking very nice, and I can see my new gear down inside. All of the parts look like they're together. Later I'm going to play with it and run it through the shifting of the gears, but first I want to get all of the pieces in. That's it, folks. I'm finished. Here's my 3-speed non-synchro mesh 1961 Ford transmission, all finished and ready to be installed in the vehicle. Thanks for watching. Give me a thumbs up if you liked this video. Subscribe to the channel. Check out other videos that may be on this channel about this Ford. But anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good day.